These suppers came straight from blistered palms, muddied soles, and 12-hour workdays, crafted to refuel the men who built the world around them. These dishes were hefty, honest, and designed to endure. While they vanish from most modern kitchens, these laborers' feasts are ready for a comeback. Boiled dinner. You could catch the aroma from halfway down the block, a chipped enamel pot quietly simmering on the back burner. Corned beef, cabbage, carrots, and potatoes, all stewing together. This one-pot New England classic was the heartbeat of factory towns, sustaining workers through long days on their feet. The meat turned fork tender, falling apart with the softest touch, while cabbage absorbed every bit of that rich, smoky broth. This was the kind of meal that signaled the end of a hard day. No precise measuring, no fancy recipes. Just toss everything in, let it simmer low and slow, and by sundown, dinner was done. Families often stretched it for days, sometimes throwing in beans, sometimes just topping it off with more water, and it still hit the mark. If there was bread around, you dipped it. If not, you drank it straight from the bowl. It quieted the belly, silenced complaints, and offered enough warmth to carry folks through the next icy dawn. These days, with our microwave dinners and endless delivery apps, the time and patience for a true boiled dinner has nearly disappeared. Cream chip beef on toast. The military had its own name for it. SOS, same old stuff, or something a bit cruder. But back home, cream chip beef on toast was the kind of meal that stuck with you literally. Dried beef, sliced whisper thin, came packed in glass jars that sat tucked away on pantry shelves for months. Chopped up and stirred into a simple white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, then poured generously over toast. This was working-class comfort at its best. When money was tight or fresh meat was out of reach, chip beef stepped up, salty, satisfying, and quick to whip up after a tiring shift. Kids would happily drag toast through the creamy gravy, soaking up every drop. Some families added peas, others tossed in chopped boiled eggs to stretch it further. After World War II, many veterans couldn't stomach it anymore after eating it so often in service. But for households through the 1950s and 60s, it was a budget-friendly go-to, until TV dinners and boxed meals took its place. Liver and onions. You didn't need to look. The second that sizzle hit the skillet, you knew what was coming. Liver and onions was a once-a-week tradition in working-class kitchens across America. Liver was dirt cheap, so much so that butchers almost gave it away. But nutritionally, it packed a serious punch. A pound of beef liver, coated in seasoned flour, pan-fried to a tender blush in the middle. Onions, sliced fine, slow-cooked until sweet and golden brown. The scent filled the house, bold, unmistakable, and for some, a bit much. But for hungry hands just clocking out, it meant dinner was near. This wasn't gourmet fare. This was fuel, loaded with iron, protein, and B vitamins. Liver kept workers going strong. Some home cooks added crispy bacon for extra depth. Others poured gravy over the top. It was always paired with mashed potatoes, perfect for catching every last drop of the pan drippings. Kids might groan at the sight, but in those days you'd be hard-pressed to spot liver and onions on dinner tables today. But for decades, it was a Thursday night tradition families could count on. Stuffed peppers. It looked fancy, but this was really a lesson in stretching ingredients. A single pound of ground beef could magically turn into a meal for 5 or even 6 when paired with bell peppers. The secret? Filler. Cooked rice expanded the mixture, while the peppers served as edible bowls. You brown the meat, fold it in the rice, maybe stirred in a dab of tomato paste or a pinch of dried seasoning, and packed each pepper full like tiny suitcases. Into the oven they went, bubbling in a sauce made from whatever pantry odds and ends were around. Tomato, broth, or just seasoned water. Every forkful delivered protein, starch, and vegetable. No need for extra sides. 4 families pinching pennies. This was more than supper. It was a survival plan. It made food stretch, turned leftovers into something new, and could easily be scaled up for larger crowds. Cooks improvised as needed. Breadcrumbs if they had them, cheese if it was available, even bits of leftover veggies folded into the mix. What mattered was that it satisfied, felt like a home-cooked meal, and made something hearty from almost nothing. Ham hocks and beans. This was slow-cooked comfort long before electric cookers came along. Start with a pound of dried beans, navy, pinto, or Great Northern, soaked overnight and simmered for hours with a smoked ham hock. As the beans softened, the meat loosened off the bone, and the broth turned into a silky, smoky stew. Ham hocks were a budget find, often sold as scraps or afterthoughts by butchers. But in a well-used pot, they transformed into something magical. The fat and connective tissue melted into the beans, creating a dish rich in flavor, even though it only used a few ingredients. This was ideal food for laborers, something you could put on the stove before heading to your shift and come home to a house filled with mouth-watering aroma. It paired beautifully with cornbread or even plain white bread to mop up the juices. Leftovers weren't wasted either, mashed into refried beans or turned into a hearty soup the next day. In working-class neighborhoods, especially mining and mill towns, ham hocks and beans made a weekly appearance. It was inexpensive, dependable, and downright delicious. But today, when time is short and instant meals rule the day, the slow magic of simmered beans has quietly slipped away. Oxtail stew. When meat was scarce, families turned to the cuts no one else wanted. One of those hidden treasures? Oxtail. Bony, fatty, and often ignored, oxtail didn't look like much, but with time and care, it delivered unmatched flavor. You didn't boast about it, but it never failed to impress at the table. Once viewed as little more than scrap, oxtail earned its place in stews where time replaced money. First, you seared the pieces, bones and fat together, until a deep, meaty aroma filled the kitchen. Then came chopped onions, garlic, carrots, sometimes barley, all tossed into the bubbling pot. Water or broth followed, and then came the wait. It wasn't quick. Hours passed, but what you got was worth every minute. The meat slowly pulled away from the bone in tender strips, while the marrow melted into the liquid, giving the broth a velvety richness. Carrots brought their natural sweetness, and barley lent body and heartiness. In kitchens that knew how to get the most from the least, oxtail stew became more than just food. It became proof that patience could still feed a family. It wasn't just a stew. It was survival in a bowl. You didn't need side dishes, just a spoon and maybe a crusty heel of bread to wipe the bowl clean. This was the kind of meal that rewarded patience, that turned overlooked meat into something memorable. In homes where leftovers were sacred, this dish only got better with time. Reheated gently the next day with a splash of water, it delivered the same warmth with even deeper flavor. Beef heart with root vegetables. Lean, hearty, and surprisingly flavorful when done right. Beef heart wasn't served for flair, but for necessity. It was a staple in lean times, especially during the Depression, when affordability mattered more than preference. The process started slow and careful, trimming the heart, chopping it into cubes, then browning it with whatever fat was on hand. From there, broth or water covered the meat, and the pot was seasoned with a few bay leaves or maybe a dash of vinegar to help break down the dense fibers. It simmered for hours until the texture softened and the flavor mellowed into something almost comforting. Root vegetables like parsnips, potatoes, and carrots were added for balance. Their earthiness sweetened the stew, grounding it in simplicity. Served with rice, bread, or just by itself, it was the kind of meal that filled you up and stayed with you. This wasn't a showpiece dinner. It was a quiet success born from knowing how to make something humble taste like something more. These days, beef heart is a rarity, tucked away in specialty shops and mostly forgotten. But in the right hands, it once turned kitchens into places of resilience and resourcefulness. Hamburger gravy on mashed potatoes. No fancy intro, just a plate and a fork. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes was weeknight gold for working families. You'd brown a pound of ground beef in a skillet until crispy and crumbly. Add a sprinkle of salt, some black pepper, and maybe chopped onions or garlic if you had extra time or ingredients. Once the meat was cooked, you'd nudge it to one side, whisk flour into the hot fat, and slowly pour in milk or water, stirring until the mixture bubbled into a thick, creamy gravy. Then, straight over mashed potatoes it went. Whether freshly whipped or made from a box didn't matter. That gravy sank in, turning every spoonful into a mix of warmth, salt, and pure satisfaction. On the side, frozen peas with a classic partner. Sometimes boiled and buttered, sometimes just microwaved and dumped straight on the plate. Some kids mixed them in, others created a barrier like a green moat around their potatoes. Either way, the whole dish came together in under 30 minutes, quick, reliable, and hearty enough to satisfy the biggest appetites. Chicken and dumplings. If there was a way to stretch one chicken to its limit, this was it. Chicken and dumplings wasn't just food, it was emotional repair. A dish that showed up when wallets were thin, but spirits needed lifting. You started with a whole bird, simmered until the meat fell clean from the bones. Once shredded and set aside, the broth kept bubbling, welcoming spoonfuls of dumpling batter, flour, salt, and milk stirred into soft dough. Dropped by the spoonful, these dumplings puffed up in the hot broth, soaking in all that flavor. Chewy, soft, and rich with chicken essence, they transformed the soup into a full meal. The best part? One pot fed everyone, and there was always enough left for round two. The broth was packed with nourishment, and the dumplings satisfied even the emptiest stomachs. Some cooks tossed in chopped carrots or celery when they had them on hand, but it wasn't necessary. The beauty of the dish was in its simplicity. This wasn't just food, it was comfort, even healing. Whether it was a head cold, aching muscles after a long shift, or the anxiety of making ends meet, a bowl of chicken and dumplings had the power to soothe. These days, with rotisserie chickens and instant recipes, the slow ritual of simmering and spooning in dumplings has nearly vanished. Salmon patties. When fresh-caught fish wasn't an option, canned salmon stood in as a humble hero. These patties were a blue-collar seafood meal, budget-friendly, protein-packed, and a refreshing break from beef or chicken. A tin of salmon, drained and crumbled, mixed with a beaten egg, a handful of breadcrumbs, and maybe a little diced onion. Formed into flat rounds and pan-fried in oil or butter. They crackled as they browned, sending a distinctly briny aroma through the kitchen. These weren't delicate seafood entrees. They were rugged, pantry-born staples. If a lemon was around, a squeeze might be added. A dash of Worcestershire sauce brought depth if the bottle hadn't run dry. Whether served with plain boiled potatoes or wedged into a bun like a fish burger, they delivered nutrition long before anyone talked about omega-3s. For folks living far from the coast, canned salmon brought the sea to their plates, shelf-stable and dependable. During World War II, when meat was scarce and canned food was king, salmon patties rose in popularity and found their place at the dinner table. Red Flannel Hash. With its signature crimson hue from beets, Red Flannel Hash was a masterclass in reinvention. After a traditional New England boiled dinner, scraps of corned beef, cabbage, and potatoes were diced and mixed with beets, then fried until crispy in a trusty cast iron pan. The beets dyed everything a deep garnet color and offered an earthy sweetness that played perfectly against the saltiness of the meat. A splash of vinegar added brightness, and on lucky mornings, a fried egg landed on top, its yolk spreading like golden gravy. This was breakfast that didn't follow the rules. Before the idea of breakfast for dinner was a thing, Red Flannel Hash was doing it. Workers wrapped portions in wax paper, taking them to the factory and reheating them on warm machinery. In places like Vermont and Maine, it was more than a dish. It was tradition, appearing in diners and kitchens throughout the region. Though once a routine way to reuse leftovers, today it's more of a regional treat, a reminder of a time when food waste wasn't an option and creativity was a daily necessity. Scrapple. Straight from Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens came Scrapple, a dish that made sure no piece of the pig went unused. The odds and ends, parts too small or strained for regular cuts, were simmered until tender, then minced and mixed with cornmeal, flour, and a carefully chosen blend of spices. The seasoned mash was packed into loaf pans and cooled into firm blocks. When sliced and fried, each piece had a crispy edge and a soft, savory center. It was stick-to-your-ribs fuel for laborers, whether in fields, factories, or workshops. Families gathered around plates of scrapple, morning or night, enjoying a dish that was hearty, affordable, and rich in protein. Often topped with maple syrup or ketchup and served with a couple of eggs. Scrapple kept bellies full and energy levels high. Making it was no quick task. It was an all-day process that often lined up with the annual butchering. Relatives pitched in, transforming a practical job into a social ritual. The recipe itself was usually a guarded family treasure. Each version a little different, each blend of spices passed down like an heirloom. Outside of places like Pennsylvania, Delaware, and a few pockets of Maryland, Scrapple is mostly unknown. But for those raised on it, the sound of it sizzling in the skillet is as familiar as a lullaby. In a time where we favor neat, boneless cuts, the lost art of turning scraps into soul-satisfying food is nearly forgotten. Pork neck bones with rice. In the Southern kitchen, when money was tight but meals still had to feed many, pork neck bones were the go-to. They weren't fancy. In fact, they were often overlooked, but they were flavorful, cheap, and came in generous packs. You'd start by searing the bones in oil until the edges browned and the smell made its way into every room. Then came onions, diced, and dropped into the pan to soak up the savory bits stuck to the bottom. Next, water or broth was added, scraping the pot and building a rich base. The bones simmered for hours, low and patient, until the meat softened and released. Some thickened the resulting gravy with flour or starch. Others let time do the thickening. That sauce, ladled over steaming white rice, was gold. Add a side of greens, maybe a biscuit, or just a few slices of bread to swipe the plate clean, and dinner was complete. This was Southern comfort at its finest. Food made from nearly nothing that delivered everything. City chicken. Known in old manufacturing towns as city chicken, this Depression-era illusion was a clever culinary sleight of hand. No chicken involved, just cubes of pork or veal threaded onto skewers, breaded, and fried to mimic a drumstick. It was a butcher's invention, born when poultry was pricier than pork and presentation mattered. Meat was tightly packed onto sticks, dipped in egg, rolled in breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, then pan-fried or oven-baked until crisp. Sometimes, it was briefly browned in a skillet before being baked under foil to lock in tenderness. What came out was tender meat inside, with a crispy outside that could fool any picky eater. Kids loved it, parents appreciated how budget-friendly it was, and everyone agreed. It looked good and tasted even better. It was a dinner table favorite served with mashed potatoes, green beans, or just plain white bread. Proof that a little creativity could go a long way. Tuna noodle casserole. Made mostly from pantry staples, tuna noodle casserole was humble but dependable. Canned tuna, elbow macaroni or egg noodles, and a basic white sauce. Butter melted in a pan, a spoonful of flour whisked in, followed by milk, created the creamy foundation. The tuna was folded in, along with the noodles, and often peas or chopped celery for a bit of color and crunch. Topped with breadcrumbs, cracker crumbs, or crushed potato chips. It was baked until bubbly and golden. From oven to table, it delivered warmth and flavor in every spoonful, the kind of dish that might not turn heads but definitely filled plates. A pantry meal that checked all the boxes, tuna noodle casserole was a depression-proof classic. A can of tuna, drained and flaked, joined the mix, adding a briny flavor and protein. You'd season with a pinch of salt, black pepper, and sometimes a dash of garlic powder, if available. Frozen peas were a frequent addition, offering color and a sweet contrast to the creamy sauce. The egg noodles were boiled separately, cooked just right, tender without being soggy, before they joined the sauce. It all came together, one comforting bite after another, each spoonful coated in rich, velvety goodness. Some families added a crispy topping, like breadcrumbs or crushed potato chips, for texture. Tuna noodle casserole wasn't a beauty queen of the dinner table, but it showed up when it mattered. This was budget cooking, pantry cooking, the kind of meal that stretched every dollar and filled hungry bellies. Kids loved its softness, while adults appreciated that it could carry the family through to the next payday. In the 1950s and 60s, it was a fixture in homes across America. Today, it's more of a nostalgic novelty, but its legacy lives on as the ultimate comfort food. Swadak, born from Native American traditions and embraced by settlers, Swadak was a dish that stretched the harvest. At its core, it was a simple combination of corn and lamima beans, but it became more than that. The sweetness of the corn paired with the buttery richness of the beans made a filling dish. Some families added salt pork or bacon fat to add depth, while others stirred in tomatoes or bell peppers for a touch of color. During hard times when meat was scarce, Swadak became a staple, packing a complete protein punch. It was especially beloved in the South and New England, where it could be canned or frozen, making it a year-round dish. Factory workers would find it waiting in their lunch pails, still warm from the morning's prep, and farmers often ate it fresh from the fields during harvest. While it has faded from dinner tables today, Swadak was once an essential side dish, so simple yet so nourishing, a humble yet integral part of the American culinary story. Chipped beef frizzled in gravy. Chipped beef frizzled in gravy was a hearty, no-fuss meal that didn't need much to satisfy. The dry beef was frizzled, or crisped, in butter, creating a complex texture and flavor as the beef curled and browned. Once it was nicely crispy, flour was added to the pan to form a roux, followed by milk to create a rich, creamy gravy speckled with the crispy beef bits. Served over toast, biscuits, or mashed potatoes, this dish was a working-class favorite. The name, frizzled, came from the sound the beef made as it hit the hot fat, a sizzling symphony that signaled a satisfying meal was close at hand. While this dish was once a staple across America, especially in the Pennsylvania and Midwest regions, where German and Dutch cooking traditions influenced local fare, it's now mostly forgotten. But in its prime, chipped beef frizzled in gravy offered warmth, flavor, and comfort for very little money. Cabbage rolls. Cabbage rolls were the kind of dish that took time, but was always worth it. Originating in Eastern European immigrant households, this dish made its way into American kitchens, especially among the working class. Large cabbage leaves were softened in boiling water, then filled with a mixture of ground meat, rice, onions, and spices. The rolls were carefully wrapped into neat little packages and simmered until they were tender and flavorful. Labor-intensive, yes, but the payoff was a hearty meal that could stretch over several days. Cabbage rolls brought people together around the table, transforming simple ingredients into something far greater than the sum of its parts. Like many Depression-era meals, they were a testament to resourcefulness, proving that with a little patience and creativity, even the most basic ingredients could create something extraordinary. Cabbage rolls were layered in a deep pot, often with tomato sauce or sauerkraut juice, and then simmered until the cabbage softened and the filling cooked through. The result was pure magic. The cabbage absorbed a sweet, mellow flavor while the meat stayed juicy inside its protective wrapper. This dish was often made in large batches with many hands involved. In steel towns and mining communities, women would gather to make hundreds at once, sharing the work and the rewards. Freezers would be stocked with meals for tired workers, and cabbage rolls made the perfect lunchbox meal. They traveled well in lunch pails and stayed warm in thermoses. Economical too, a little meat went a long way when bulked up with rice and wrapped in cabbage. Today, cabbage rolls are usually reserved for holidays or special occasions. Their once commonplace presence on family dinner tables a thing of the past. Salsbury steak. Salsbury steak, named after the 19th century physician who championed the health benefits of ground beef, was the closest many families ever got to eating steak, and nobody complained. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce for a bit of extra flavor. This mixture was shaped into oval patties, flattened just enough to sear perfectly in a hot skillet. Once browned, the patties were set aside while the real star of the show, the mushroom gravy, was prepared. Sautéed mushrooms and onions were mixed with flour to soak up the pan drippings, followed by broth or water to create a smooth, bubbling gravy. The patties were placed back in the pan, where they simmered, soaking up every drop of flavor. The result was juicy, savory, and filling, paired with peas and mashed potatoes, either from a box or scratch, depending on the time and energy. This wasn't steakhouse food, but it didn't need to be. It was hot, comforting, and felt like a treat even on a weekday. Leftovers were perfect for sandwiches, with a little extra gravy spread like mayo. Pot roast with root vegetables. Pot roast was the working man's version of a feast. A tough cut of beef, typically chuck or round, was browned in a heavy pot, then simmered with onions, carrots, and potatoes until it became fork tender. This was transformation cooking at its finest. The cheap, sinewy cut no one wanted became something luxurious after hours of patient cooking. The vegetables soaked up all the rich, beefy flavor, turning sweet and savory. The secret to success was time, low and slow, and working mothers would start it in the oven before church and come home to a house filled with comfort. The meat was sliced for Sunday dinner, then repurposed throughout the week. Sandwiches on Monday, chopped in a soup on Tuesday, and mixed with noodles on Wednesday. Every family had their own pot roast tricks. Some added a splash of red wine if they could afford it, while others swore by a packet of onion soup mix. Regardless of the method, the result was the same: a meal that marked the end of one week and the beginning of the next, feeding the family for days. With the rise of fast food and quicker cooking methods, the all-day pot roast has become more of a special occasion dish, something that's savored when there's time to appreciate it. Meatloaf with oatmeal. When breadcrumbs ran low or went stale, oatmeal stepped up, not just holding the loaf together, but adding heartiness, bite, and stretching a single pound of meat further than you'd think. You started with ground beef, cracked in an egg, poured in a bit of milk, and then in went the oats, dry and ready to soak up every drop of flavor. A pinch of salt, some black pepper, and if you were lucky, a chopped onion for a little extra punch. You pressed it all into a pan, slapped a generous layer of ketchup across the top, and baked it until the edges pulled away and the top turned caramelized and sweet. It wasn't flashy, but it was dependable. Sliced thick, served with canned green beans or mashed potatoes. This loaf kept everyone at the table full. You didn't need gravy, though no one ever turned it down. The next day, cold meatloaf sandwiches were even better. A slab between two slices of bread with a smear of mustard or ketchup. Meatloaf is still around today, but the oatmeal version has largely been replaced by breadcrumb recipes or more elaborate versions with specialty meats and fancy glazes. The humble oatmeal loaf, born of necessity and practicality, has faded from everyday cooking. Beans and franks. Simple but satisfying, beans and franks was the ultimate cheap meal that still delivered on flavor. A can of baked beans, sliced hot dogs, and a few splashes of ketchup or barbecue sauce all bubbled together in a single pot. The beans absorbed the richness of the hot dogs, which released their salty, smoky flavor as they heated. The sauce thickened, coating everything in a sweet, savory glaze. Some added mustard or brown sugar to make it their own. This dish was bachelor food, kid food, and tired parent food all at once. It came together in minutes, required minimal cleanup, and filled empty stomachs without emptying wallets. A pot could feed a family for pennies per serving. In work camps and construction sites, beans and franks appeared in thermoses and metal lunch pails. At home, it was the go-to meal when payday was still days away. Served with bread to soak up the sauce or spooned over rice to stretch it further. Beans and franks were unpretentious, reliable food that got the job done. Today, concerns about processed meats and sodium have caused it to lose its place in regular rotation. But for decades, It was the standby that never failed to please hungry eaters on a budget. Chicken Pepperc hash. When there was a little chicken left, a scoop of sour cream, and a heavy hand with the paprika, you could pull off a dish that felt like it came from another country, even if you made it on a Wednesday. Hungarian chicken Pepperc hash was bold, comforting, and built on just a handful of ingredients that turned into something far more than the sum of their parts. You started with bone-in chicken pieces, legs, thighs, or maybe a whole cut-up bird, browned in a deep skillet until the skin crisped and the aroma filled every corner of the kitchen. Then came the onions, sliced thin and sautéed until golden. Right before the key ingredient was added, paprika, and not just a sprinkle, but a generous handful that turned everything deep red and earthy. Some folks added garlic, some didn't. A bit of flour went in to thicken the sauce, followed by water or broth to loosen it again. Just before serving, a scoop of sour cream was stirred into the pan, giving the sauce a rich, velvety finish. You spoon it over wide egg noodles, soft and buttery, perfect for soaking up every bit of sauce. Some added parsley on top if they were feeling fancy, but most didn't. It wasn't about flair, it was about flavor, deep, smoky, tangy, and hearty. It fed families, warmed bellies, and stuck in your memory long after the plates were cleaned. Bread pudding. Nothing went to waste in a working household, especially not bread. When loaves went stale, they were transformed into bread pudding, a sweet, custardy treat that felt like a luxury, even in lean times. Chunks of bread were soaked in a mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, then baked until puffed and golden. The outside crisped while the inside stayed soft and creamy. If there were raisins or apples to spare, they went in too, plumping up as they baked. This was thrifty cooking disguised as dessert. The ingredients were basic, things most households had on hand, but the result was pure comfort. A warm square of bread pudding with a drizzle of sauce made from brown sugar and butter could make even the most exhausting day feel a little better. Factory workers and miners would find slices wrapped in wax paper in their lunch pails, a sweet reminder of home in the middle of a grueling shift. It traveled well and stayed fresh for days, making it perfect for sharing and transporting. In an era of artisanal baked goods and gourmet desserts, the humble bread pudding has been elevated and transformed beyond recognition. But the original, born of necessity